Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation because it combines two of the things that I'm very passionate and interested in, and that our work at Inscribe is very much all about. So we are going to be talking about the role that artificial intelligence can or might play as we think about things around student connection and belonging. So where is the intersection of these two features, and how can they reinforce or potentially work against each other? I am thrilled to have some amazing panelists joining me today. I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself in just a second, but just as an initial introduction, Dr. Kim Siegenthaler, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Innovation at CUNY, and Dr. Miguel Nino, Assistant Vice President for Adult and Online Education at Rhode Island College. Before I have you guys introduce yourself, I will say I am Katie Kapler. I am co-founder and CEO at Inscribe. We are a virtual community platform that helps students connect, particularly non-traditional students, connect with peers, faculty, and staff to build relationships, find answers and solutions, and develop social capital during their learning journey. I'm going to give you a little bit of lowdown on Inscribe in a minute if you're not familiar with us. But just from a logistics standpoint, we are recording this session, so we'll send that out to you guys as soon as we have it ready. We would love for this to be an interactive conversation, so I definitely have questions that are going to guide us today, but if you have particular things that you're thinking about or curious about or questions that come up during, please post them in the chat. You will notice that when you open the chat, it will default to just post to the panelists. We'd love it if you would change that to post to everybody so they can see the wonderful questions that you have. And then Danielle, who is joining us today, who is our Senior Director of Sales and Marketing Operations, is going to keep us honest to what's happening in the chat. She's going to keep an eye on that. And she is fully empowered to interrupt us to make sure that we get those questions answered as we go along. Okay, so while our team is introducing themselves, I think we've already started this process, but please, it'd be great if you could also introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from, maybe what brought you here today. And again, we're just really excited that you chose to spend some of your Wednesday afternoon with us. So Kim, tell us just a little bit about your role at CUNY. I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with the system, but maybe just a word on the institutions as well.
Sure. So CUNY is a system of 25 institutions, including community colleges, senior colleges, and then professional and niche schools, serving about 230,000 students, primarily in the New York City and contiguous areas there. My role is at the central office, where I lead initiatives related to online education, the expansion and integration of academic technologies, library services, our LMS transition, our career and credentials pathways, and yes, AI are all sort of part of my portfolio. I've kind of jokingly giving myself the title of startup engineer, because virtually everything I'm working on is new to the institution within the last couple of years. Exciting.
But yeah, I don't think there was anything you didn't mention in that list of things you're responsible for. So big job, but it does sound like you get to do all the fun and exciting, innovative stuff. Miko, tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about Rhode Island College and your role today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this conversation. It's a topic that I'm very excited about. I pretty much, as the Assistant Vice President for Adult and Online Education, oversee in partnership with the academic departments the portfolio of online programming. So to put it simple, in short, if you have an idea of a program that you want to develop online, you contact me and I take you from the whole process, from the beginning of the idea, to use different tools to see if it's feasible to create a program online. And then we get hands-on developing through a lot of steps. So I make sure that all the elements in the system of online learning are part of your program. I'm also overseeing the BPS program, the Bachelor of Professional Studies, which is the very first 100% online program at Rhode Island College for working adults. So pretty much those people who want to come to finish what once they started have the ability to do it through this program. And my role when it comes to AI is like I leverage the power and the ability that it has to give us so much data and information. So that's a very basic part of my job. I use it along all the way to make sure that the experience, not only for the faculty and staff I work with, but also for the students in this program is positive.
Awesome. Well, and I love that you represent, both of you, the students that make up the vast majority of our higher ed population, which are non-traditional students, degree completers, adult learners. And a lot of our conversation, I think, today is going to touch on some of the unique opportunities and maybe challenges of that population. So welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. I did realize I forgot on the first slide to mention that we are going to use a tool called Slido. Danielle, I can't go backwards. So will you just drop, if you have it, will you drop it in the chat?
I will.
It's an interactive polling system. So if you go to that website and enter the code that Danielle is going to give you, it'll bring up the Slido system. And then as those questions come up, you can participate with us. So sorry that I forgot that on the first slide, but all right, so let's do a couple of other things. And then we'll jump right into the questions. So one is, I just want to give everyone an overview of Inscribe so you can kind of see how the work that we do is related to the conversation that we're having today. If you're not familiar with our platform, I mentioned we are a virtual community platform that really partners with higher education institutions to create a very dynamic, flexible, on-demand location that students can go to anytime they have questions, they need advice, they just want to connect with someone for that sort of human relationship building. We work primarily with non-traditional students, so online learners, students at community colleges, essentially students who are either because of location or time constraints just don't have the luxury of being on campus 24 hours a day, but still crave and need the opportunity to build these types of relationships and connections. And we always talk about ourselves as a human-first, technology-powered system. So we are big believers in the power of technology and AI to help support learning and learning at scale, but we are steadfast in our belief that we should not be using those technologies to replace the connections and relationships that humans are building. So that'll come up a little bit throughout the conversation here, and maybe I can expound on that a little bit as we go. Just a couple of definitions, because sometimes people ask, just to ground us in the conversation. This is a very simple definition of AI. I know there's much more complicated ones, but essentially the idea of technology simulating human intelligence or human capabilities as a computer. I do want to note that I think the big thing in AI right now that a lot of people are talking about is generative AI. And certainly that has been transformative in terms of emulating human behavior. It's not the only AI that's out there. So I'm opening the floor to the audience and to our panelists to also talk about other aspects of artificial intelligence that are relevant. And then sense of belonging, I think probably a lot of people have been thinking about this lately, but we think about it as a student's feeling of being connected, cared, accepted, respected, valued by the institution that they belong to and by groups and individuals at that institution. So it's really a perception, an internal perception that students have. I think it's important to note that because sense of belonging is not something you can tell somebody to have. It's something that you have to help them foster for themselves. And again, I think that will come up in the conversation we have today. I've done a lot of talking to kick us off. So I'd love to hear from the audience, and Kim and Nico, if you want to join a little bit here too as well. Just curious, for those of us that are out there, what technologies or AI technologies are you already using? Whether that's in the classroom, it could be in your personal life. How are you leveraging AI today to make your life more dynamic, easier, help you connect with other individuals? I don't know, Kim or Nico, do you have any specific examples? Minimal use of ChatGPT.
Yeah, Katie, I wanted to jump in here because one of my suspicions when we began talking about this is that AI is already integrated in so many of our technologies that we're not even aware of. We don't
Right.
think about them as containing it. So I did a little research. I went to Gen AI and I said, tell me, and I went to actually several different systems to ask the same question, is what academic technologies incorporate AI? And it gave me this really extensive list of how it's used, specific tools that incorporate AI. And I was really surprised at all of the places that AI is already and has been well before Gen AI exploded, where it's been present in a lot of the technologies that we've been using in some cases for years.
Yeah, I think I think people didn't know, it's sort of it had been under the covers in a way. Whereas the generative AI is so right in front of you, you're interacting directly with it, that I think it kind of flew under the radar for some period of time. Were there any examples from there that were surprising to you, or places where maybe you didn't even realize it was existing?
Well, I think there were really a lot where that I just went, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Once it kind of surfaced, I went, well, of course it is.
Yeah.
But I would not have, if you had just given me the quiz, like we've done our group here, and said, name all these, I wouldn't have identified them. They wouldn't have even entered my mind. But then when I start seeing the list and thinking about the different ways that AI is being used in these different platforms, then it begins to feel like, oh, well, of course it is.
Yeah, right. And I think no surprise what we're seeing here, a lot of people playing around with some of the generative systems, recognizing that some of the technologies that they use, Grammarly, Perplexity are incorporating these things as well. Even things like Microsoft Word, right? Google, that are ubiquitous. Miko, did you want to add anything?
I'm 100% with him. It has been around for quite some time. So we now are thinking that it's going to change things, and it's going to, but it has been changing things already. I teach a class in digital learning, and I use it for my students, for them to see how the technology can work for you and not against you. Some of my favorite, top of my head, Koala AI. I'm huge into the 21st century skills. I believe that sometimes promoting creativity, communication, collaboration can be challenging. How do we promote that? So AI has helped me to promote that. With Koala AI, the students have the ability to have a working space, share ideas, and the AI provides an organization to that collaborative process. That's huge. ChatGPT is another one that I use in class. I use it for the students. There's one exercise that we do together in which they have to just type how to write a module about, and they pick the topic of the module. But then it generates something that the language doesn't align with the one in the class. So I ask them, use it as a foundation. It's not that you're necessarily going to be cheating on that, but you, as the expert now learning about this, the student, you can see what the tool generates for you, and you make it better. You make it sound and part of the process. And students get very impressed, especially because I'm openly telling them, all you have to do is type this, see what it generates, and make it even better, make it your own.
Yeah.
Another tool that is very important that I suggest, and this is more at the program level, is DataKind, because dropouts, people who has to drop out of college, is a reality. And this tool can help you to prevent that from happening. There are things that you can recognize, patterns, that if you recognize them on a timely fashion, you can avoid the students from dropping out. So I think that one is huge for student success.
Yeah. So, and I love those examples. I also love how you're using it in the classroom, which leads very nicely into our first question here, because the idea of using it in a way that's helping students learn how they will then ultimately be using it when they leave school and when they're in their jobs, as a foundation for creating content, or how to develop the prompts that I want to get, that baseline content out, I think can be really important. How do you kind of already started exploring this a little bit, but what are some of the ways that you think bringing AI, especially into the classroom, will influence student connection and engagement, either positively or negatively? Kim, why don't you start us off there?
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting that, again, once you begin to look at it, go, oh, of course it is. But how much AI is already infused in our learning management systems in terms of accessibility features, adaptive learning features, automated grading, and those kinds of things that are already part of the online environment that we don't necessarily think of. And in terms of implications for student connections and engagement, it can go either way, right? I mean, you can use it to facilitate more student engagement, but there's the potential that an instructor could use it to sort of replace themselves, right? I'm going to automate all of this. I'm going to set all these things in motion, and then I can sit back and let the LMS, let the tools carry more of the burden. And I think, that's one of the concerns that I hear often about, oh, you're going to use AI to replace teachers.
Right.
You're just going to make all of this automated. And I think this is a little bit to what Miko was talking about. It has to supplement, it complements, it can't replace that meaningful interaction, either student to student or student to instructor.
Well, and there does seem to be this positive middle ground where maybe some of the activities teachers were doing that were very repetitive or not making the best use of their skills can be pushed off onto technology to take care of that, and then maybe reserving their hours for the things that really only intelligent humans can do, more of that relationship building and so forth. Like, do you think that's a possible middle ground that we could end at?
Yeah, absolutely.
Miko, what are your thoughts?
There is a moment in the movie Hair, for those of you who have watched it, with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. And I think towards the end of the movie, we can all agree that as powerful as that relationship was, at the very end, the machine didn't have the ability to replace a human being. And that was that realization in that moment. So I always think about that as an example for how this is changing education. You have to use it as a supplement. I agree with Kim. And I think it's going to change the game because of social presence. One of the reasons why students drop out from online programs is because they don't find that social presence. We have a misconception when it comes to social presence, thinking that it means that you have to be in synchronous experiences. Right. Social presence starts when you feel that somebody's going to be there for you to give you timely feedback and support. It doesn't mean that you have to be all the time seeing each other. It means that when you need to reach out, that you're going to have that sense there. So there's a tool called Well Me Right, which is amazing because sometimes we forget that when you think about student success, you have to think about how they feel internally, their health and all of that. So that's a resource for students to check on their mental health, to make sure that they feel connected. And it's pretty much having all the resources for support from a point of view more of the health and the mind, which obviously translates into student success as well. So I think these tools are going to provide platforms that instructors sometimes don't have the time to provide. Many students in online programs complain that it takes a lot of time for them to get an answer when they pose a question to the instructor. When you have a chatbot, for instance, chatbot has been around for quite some time in the website, the students can actually find the information that they need to move forward. So yes, the presence of the instructor is important, but sometimes for basic questions that stop the productivity of the students, you can use the tool. Yeah. So I encourage instructors to recommend, hey, these are the tools that you can ask. This is how we're going to integrate them, so you can get feedback faster than what I could provide to you.
Right. Yeah.
So, can you tell us what the name of the tool was one more time?
The one that
that you just recommended. Yes.
Well, maybe, yeah. I'm gonna type it here in the box.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, me right, yeah.
And I also think one of the things I'm really excited about in terms of this idea of AI and engagement is when I talk to institutions, a lot of times where the responsibility for student engagement, connection, belonging lies is very distributed. And maybe it's not everybody agrees on whose responsibility that is. And because it's something that is not just a point in time activity, like you have to sort of continually be reinforcing it. If a particular classroom is not accomplishing that goal, or if a particular interaction outside the classroom is not accomplishing that goal, it can have very negative consequences for that student. What I see AI being able to do is start to think about helping us put the student at the center of the experience so we can think about them beyond these points in time and have a very holistic view of who they are, what they've been doing, where they want to go, and then facilitate each person that's touching that student having a more comprehensive view of who they are and being able to facilitate conversation and connection with them in a more meaningful way. So that's one of the things, like really thinking about technology and experience that go across the entire student journey and not laying the responsibility of any one of these things just at one person's feet or at one person's door. That leads us into great, so did we get that posted, Miko?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about, sort of generally speaking, how these technologies might impact. Are there specific ways that you see AI being applied at your institution or elsewhere where the goal of that implementation is really about fostering connection and belonging? Have you seen that happening anywhere? And Miko, I'll have you start us off this time.
Absolutely. Well, the tool that I mentioned, Pop AI, what I like, it's pretty much a dashboard for collaboration. Even if you are in a live face-to-face environment, it can be very hard to share documents. It can be very hard to find the right way to collaborate. So that tool allows you for students to be at different time zones, doing different things, and they come together to work in projects as a team. And what I like about that is that that's a skill. To learn how to use AI to collaborate, it's something that you can use for the rest of your career. So I think it's perfect timing to do it in the classroom. So yeah. I'm seeing definitely that.
Kim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so an example that I'd like to point out is from Georgia State University, which is where I was before I came to CUNY, where they've created what's called the Georgia State Panther Connect. And it pulls data from the student information system, from first-time students' admission applications, their new student orientations, and other data bits about them to identify potential co-curricular organizations and programs that might be of interest. So Georgia State has approximately 53,000 students. It's easy to get lost there.
Yeah.
Particularly because it's primarily a commuter school. So students come in, they go out. And so finding that social network can be really difficult. And so this program is designed to help connect them with groups and organizations and activities that align with their established interest, so they don't have to go searching for that. I think at Georgia State, when I left, there were something like 500 student organizations. Wow. You can imagine how overwhelming that is for a freshman who's just arriving and trying to figure out, where do I fit? How do I begin to make those connections?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that relates very much to kind of where my mind was going with this. You can see some examples on the screen here of the work that we're doing at Inscribe, which I think is very, very overlapping with what you were working on at Georgia State. Our experience has been just what you were saying. When you put students in a big community with all of their peers, there are so many awesome benefits to that in terms of meeting people they might never have met, connecting with others. But for a lot of students, that is very overwhelming and intimidating. And so what you really need to do is take this big group and then figure out what are the subgroups or the sub-interests or the sub-needs within this space. And then how do I proactively put those individuals together in a smaller way that will allow them to start to build relationships and connection and confidence, and then, grow from there. So very cool that you guys are also working on that concept, and AI is great for that because finding those patterns is, there's some of that you can do as a human or as a technology in a basic way, but really looking through the types of things that students are telling you and the questions that they're asking, you can identify these really unique patterns of groups of people that might never have come together otherwise. So,
and the ability to be able, the ability to be able to do that quickly.
yes,
A human can do it, but a student will have graduated by the time the human makes all of those connections.
Totally. Well, and the opportunity to think about that community as even bigger than your student population, right? Like, how can we bring alumni into this space as well? Because they have all kinds of wisdom and relationships that might be relevant. And as that pool of people gets bigger, to your point, the timeline of when a human's going to be able to do that is getting, you're in retirement by the time they figured out who you should have been connecting with and talking to. So love that concept, and very excited about some of the work we're doing there as well. Well, so this definitely leans in. Oh, so I should pause. Daniel, do we have any questions in the chat that you would like us to address?
Well, I see Miko has his hand up, so
Oh,
I'm gonna
Yeah.
throw
you don't need to raise your hand. You just interrupt me.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to mention that I know the presentation is about AI, but I don't want people to get discouraged now and to think that if you don't have AI or you don't know how to use it, you cannot do these things. It's always instructional design. Even without AI, good instruction is connected to the design. So there are still things that you can do to make sure your students have a sense of belonging and connection. I'm gonna give you a very simple tip that has changed my life. In my online course, I have something called Course Cafe, in which the students have a space to talk about anything they want. I check once a week just to make sure it's not out of control or something crazy is happening, but it's a space for the students to ask each other questions, share resources, share tips, talk about how the week went. So that's one of the things that I do. I make my students go through the pain of working in teams remotely once a semester, so they understand firsthand the challenges and how you have to be organized to make that happen. And then in another class that I teach here at RIC, what I do for my students, I assign them 2 partners. So they have to meet once a week as that group of 3 people to talk just about what went well or didn't go well in the week as they are moving towards those 7 weeks courses. So again, AI is gonna facilitate this even more, but there are things that you can still do without that because it's all based on the design.
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I certainly want people to recognize that technology is, and AI in particular, are not always the answer to every question or problem around building student engagement and belonging. And especially if you're working with a smaller set of students, sometimes the implementation of too much technology can actually get in the way of facilitating some of that stuff. So start simple, kind of figure out what models work. And then as you're thinking about scale or, getting to 53,000 students, that's when the technology can be really helpful in helping you scale that over time. So those were great tips. Thank you so much for sharing those. Curious that you guys can put in the chat too, if there's anybody teaching in the classroom, if there's any special things that you do as well to either with technology or without help your students connect to each other and get to know each other and kind of find their place in that model. Well, so one of the questions I often get, or maybe even concerns, is sometimes when it comes to adopting or implementing or taking advantage of these solutions, what we find is it's the students who are already really proactive, or the students who maybe don't need as much help are the ones that take advantage of it. And the students who maybe are less certain, don't have as much experience, maybe are coming in with a little bit less confidence, they tend to shy away. But of course, those are the ones you're trying to reach all the time. So are there ways that we think that AI can help reach out to those students and bring them into the fold, in the process, help us kind of help students connect with a more diverse set of learners than they otherwise would? Maybe if they're just self-selecting, sometimes we end up falling into the group of people that, have such similar backgrounds to us. We're not necessarily meeting or engaging with new interests and ideas. So, what do you think, Kim, about this kind of topic and how technology might play a role in it.
One of the things that is interesting is that often students are more comfortable engaging with a chatbot, a virtual assistant, than they are with a human, because the chatbot doesn't judge them on, they don't perceive that the chatbot judges them on whether or not their question is stupid, or how they phrase it, or if they have to ask a lot of questions. And again, when I was at Georgia State, and we had a very sophisticated chatbot, Pounce, that we found that students actually preferred, in many cases, to talk to Pounce than to talk to a real human, because there was no judgment there. There was no perception of judgment. And so I think with respect to the student population that you're talking about, that may feel a little intimidated by the bureaucracy, or feel less confident in that environment, the ability to talk to a chatbot and get quality answers, and then have that anything that's more complex elevated to a person who will reach out to them, really is freeing in some respects.
Right. It opens up the opportunity for engagement with a much broader population than maybe where you would have started otherwise. I've heard that a lot. I know there's a lot of people studying that right now. And I've always said I would love to do a study about, you know, given the option of talking to peers or talking to, you know, staff and faculty, or talking to a chatbot, where would students go, and in what scenarios drive that desire?
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt, but
No, please.
You know, a chatbot is only as good as its training.
Yeah.
And if you've not trained it well, if it doesn't have the right style, if it doesn't have accurate information, then it's awful, right? We were doing a test with one of our campuses earlier this morning and asked it a question about financial aid or something, and then it said, well, you can check on the status of your application. It's like totally unrelated response. So that's not helpful. And that's not going to provide, again, a student who may feel less adept at navigating the institutional complexity. That's not helpful. So, you know, it's not none of these tools that we're talking about in and of themselves are problem solvers. They're tools, but we have to train them, and we have to use them appropriately for them to be useful.
Right. Well, and the danger is they have started to take on a personality that presents as a problem solver. So reminding yourself that it is not actually generating knowledge, it is just regurgitating the knowledge that it's already been fed, something we have to continue to remind ourselves as we bring it into higher use and with students and so forth. So I think that's a great point. So there's both sides of this, where reaching a broader population of people, lowering the barrier to asking questions or willing to be vulnerable, or, you know, talk about issues that are presented, but making sure that the content that's being delivered on the back end is appropriate and accurate and supported.
Katie, 2 questions.
Yeah.
How do you get around AI biases and stereotyping? Anyone?
Do either of you think about that in how you're applying AI today? I mean, everyone thinks about that, but.
Yeah, Miko, I keep jumping in, so you want to respond to that one first?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I believe, as you mentioned, Kim, it's very important to train the tool. It's very important to train the tool. I think eventually the tools are getting better. I do regular checkups in terms of diversity, because I believe representation matters a lot when it comes to inclusion. So tools like Pictory, to give you an example, they can help you to create a story. ChatGPT as well, I use lots of scenarios, written scenarios, and I have seen how they come a long way when it comes to including more diversity in the outcomes. So I think how do you get around them? You have to manually, in a way, improve the outcome that is generated by the tool. And I think people involved in working with this tool, little by little, they have to be integrating more and more of these diverse points of view so that tools can respond to them.
And then the second question you may have just answered about Pictory. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah.
We have an audience member that's looking for AI suggestions for creating videos for classes.
Okay, so our one, it's a good one, and I will say Pictory. So those two, when you are creating your learning materials, well, they make your life easier as you create the content for your class. But I see also a good response when it comes to diversity. Like, I think you really find the representation that you're looking forward to having.
How do you test that, Miko? Do you have like specific things you do to test the AI for representation? And
It's all about the prompt.
yeah,
Like, help me putting together a slide that includes a diverse background. And as I said at the beginning, you got a couple things that were off. Now you can see that the tool has been trained and it's responding better
Yeah.
to that.
yeah,
I also believe that we should still keep an eye. I haven't seen it 100% perfect, so it's also manually to have to fix why we don't see so much diversity or inclusion.
yeah. So there really is an onus on the user of the AI to be responsible for evaluating that and, you know, being proactive in assessing that and making sure you're also weaving it into your expectations of the AI that you're using. Feels today like that, you know, onus still is on us in a way to make sure that's happening.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say one more thing. Sometimes you can be very specific with the problem. Like, I want 5 people and I want this, and that will also help you a lot. Because sometimes that's hard to find, and when I'm putting together a presentation or a video, it's hard sometimes to find the image that I have in my head. So you have to be descriptive with the prompt, and it's beautiful because the more descriptive you are, you get what you want. So I think institutions can provide some training so faculty and administration understand what diversity really means. And that training can be then what you use when you are using the tool.
Yeah. So weaving that even into prompt development training and starting from the basics and moving forward. That's really important. Kim, were you gonna jump in as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in support of your comment, you cannot overemphasize the importance of the user taking responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, the tool is what it is. You know, it's been fed its data in various ways that are unknown to us, really, in terms of the different systems and platforms. And speaking more specifically about Gen AI. And so it is our responsibility to evaluate the output and either revise the prompt or go to a different tool that will give you a more representative or diverse or whatever you're looking for. And I think this is one of the concerns too that we see from faculty. Oh, well, it's just an uncritical use of machine generated information.
Right.
And that's our role as leaders, as faculty, as designers, whatever your role is, to use it responsibly, to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and that you don't just accept it either as fact, because we know that it also it's quite capable of hallucinating. And if you ask it, Claude or Perplexity, one of those, it will admit it and apologize profusely for doing so. And so just do your own due diligence with the tools.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I'm so glad that we brought that up because, you know, personal responsibility, personal accountability, and know what you're looking for and what you're really, you know, make sure you know what you're trying to get out of it before you just leverage what it's providing to you. I was also going to say on this topic, because it's related in terms of interaction between students of diverse backgrounds, one of the things that we see in our community spaces is sometimes on the surface, if you try to build relationships between students just based on, let's say, demographic information, or even maybe the interests that they tell you up front that they have, you will miss out on some subtle things that are going on with students that actually could create really interesting connections for them. There was an example previously of, students who are parenting while they're learning, or maybe they have particular jobs or work in particular careers. And what we are excited about is students will talk about that, like in a community space like ours, students will talk about those things with each other in these really unstructured conversations that you would kind of miss if you were just eyeballing it. But what the technology can do is identify those, where those things are overlapping or what patterns are happening, and create much more subtle, dynamic connections between students, which, we see as also facilitating these connections between students of diverse backgrounds, like helping them find each other in ways that they never would have found each other before. So that's something we're really excited about. And it also speaks to the concept of, scale and how do you do this for a large number of students? How do you do it in a cost-effective way? Which kind of relates to our final question here, which is, do you see the work that's happening today in AI? Do you see long-term that it will actually improve access and equity to education, or is it have the potential to actually exacerbate some of the differences that we see there for learners? Are you in a hopeful space today, or are you feeling a little bit nervous about what is to come? So Kim, you start us off on this.
Well, I'm going to stop and point to Danielle because I think you had a question or two that you wanted to highlight.
Oh, sorry, Danielle.
No, it's fine. No, it's all good. There are two questions. So where are students having these conversations? And I guess the second one's not a question, that's just adding to it. But is this in the LMS or a more informal platform?
Oh, so for me specifically, the conversations we see are taking place in our platform, Inscribe. So it's a community space that can be integrated into the LMS, or it could be integrated into your student portal or your websites. It's kind of its own system that lives within your technology ecosystem. But it's designed to give students a place to just talk to each other and share ideas and advice. So it's very unstructured, very sort of student-led, and you can learn a lot about what your students are thinking and feeling and excited about and worried about in these spaces. It's really exciting. And I don't know, Miko and Kim, you probably have, Miko, you mentioned you have your course cafe, which sounds very similar. It's kind of a microcosm of that, where your students can talk to each other. I'm sure you learn a lot about your students from those spaces, even if you're not, actively in there moderating and participating. Kim, do you have tools like that at CUNY where students are given an opportunity to kind of chat and collaborate with each other in this informal way?
Not on a system-wide basis. Individual colleges may be doing different things, but
yeah,
not widespread,
right,
to my knowledge.
And and then left to their own devices, students will go out and do this in Discord or
Slack.
Facebook or Slack, so those conversations are happening somewhere. It's just a matter of, if you want to learn from them, it's helpful to have a space that you have access to that is sort of sanctioned by your organization, that you can get data out of, so you can capitalize on that a little bit better.
Yeah, this is it's sort of related to several of the questions that we talked about, but and it's about the responsibility that we have as users. As the AI tools become more sophisticated, it is increasingly possible that it is not discernible that you're interacting with AI versus a human. And I had a recent example on a personal level. I contacted a company for information, and I got a phone call from Ashley. A follow-up phone call from Ashley. We had a nice conversation, very relaxed, blah, 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 blah. Finished our business. then a little later, I got a call from somebody else at the company about setting up an appointment. I said, oh, well, I've already been in touch with Ashley. And he said, Ashley's not real. She's our AI. But Ashley never disclosed that she was AI. And I think from an ethical perspective, it's important that if it's a chat bot or if it's some AI tool that a student is interacting with, that they know it's AI and that it's not masquerading as a real human.
I 100% agree. I'm not sure everyone agrees with that. How did you feel when you found out that it was AI?
Well, I laughed because, you know, I mean, I'm working in this space and we're trying to figure some things out. So one, my first response was, I'm impressed.
Right.
Because Ashley felt and sounded very real. On the other hand, I didn't feel deceived, but I could imagine in another setting that I would have.
Yeah.
You know, that depending on what kind of information I'm sharing or what the topic is, I want to know whether Ashley is real or not. And of course, in an educational setting, you guys are probably most of you familiar with Georgia Tech's Jill Watson.
Right.
You know, the TA and how they piloted that, but sometimes students didn't know. It wasn't that Georgia Tech was hiding that, but it was, you know, sort of this beta test. But they actually preferred talking to Jill. They found Jill to be more helpful in some cases than their human TA.
Yeah. Well, I think your point is really well taken, which is for transactional conversations, I don't know that I would still like to know, but if I found out later, I don't know that I would be upset about it. I think my reaction would be very similar to yours. But if I'm building an emotional relationship with somebody virtually and I find out later that it's like you've been catfished, right? It's like, that's not actually a human. I've been tricked into building an emotional connection with something that's not real. That seems very dangerous to me, I guess, is kind of where I would go with that. Miko, we went a little off topic here, but I love this question. I usually bring it into these conversations. So I'm so glad you went there, Kim. Miko, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one.
Well, I'm gonna say one thing about the previous topic. I always make sure my students disclose when they have used AI for each portion of their work, and they have to be very specific about how the tool helped them. Yeah. So I think it's a way for them to not be afraid, because there can be some stigma that using AI is that you're being lazy. It's not necessarily that. Sometimes they're using it because you want to leverage what the tool can offer, but it's very important that you disclose with specifics how the tool assisted in your work.
Yes. Yeah. So disclosure works in many different ways, right? Like the AI should disclose, the humans should disclose. And you know, we'll probably get to a place, you mentioned there might be some stigma. I mean, it seems like we're going to get to a place where there's just sort of an assumption that you've used AI in a lot of cases, that it won't be considered the naughty thing to do or the wrong thing to do. It's like, we're going to head in that direction.
And I realize I didn't answer your question, so I'm gonna do it now. I'm optimistic. I believe that the advancements are gonna definitely help with equity and access in education. And I'm gonna go back to the same example that I mentioned about DataKind, because now you have the ability to support and prevent those students who are at risk of finishing and they have higher chances of dropping out. Now that tool can help you identify those problems early and offer support along the way. I think that before the tool, we could experience that there was no hope for these students, that they were destined to follow the patterns based on that. So I think it's a really preventive way to support those groups who are at higher risks of dropping out.
Yeah, I love that. I love that as well. What about you, Kim? How, you think we're heading in a positive direction, or are you concerned?
Well, it's a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
So like Miko said, the potential is immense. I mean, with the predictive analytics, the virtual teaching assistants, educational games and activities that are all so powerful in one, helping the institution identify students who are at risk and exactly where they are at risk. and determining appropriate interventions to help them get on track and stay on track. And then those tools that are really student facing that the student can use, is empowered to use to facilitate their own learning in ways that were not readily available, you know, where you essentially can create your own private tutor to help you in calculus, which I would have failed, you know. But then there's the challenge when we talk about that access, because we're increasingly seeing those paywalls, right? For Gen AI, oh yeah, you can use it, it's free, until,
Right.
you know, you get, oh, well, you can have 5 prompts and then I'm going to shut you off for 24 hours unless you pay me, or you get 10 prompts, or you can do this kind of thing. And so it does again become, in some respects, the haves and the have-nots. Can you pay the $20 a month to have the Omni version as opposed to the free version that's, you know, its data set is 2 years old or 3 years old, as opposed to this one that's more current, that has more power? And so I think there's a lot of that kind of challenge in terms of what are we able to make available to all of our students? What not? What are they then become responsible for? Because I think we started, and Miko, I think you made this point at the very beginning of the conversation, is students are going to be using AI in their work in almost any field. They're going to be using AI, and the opportunities that we give them to develop expertise while they're students, and also to understand the ethics around it, what's appropriate use, is really important. But if their use is limited by their ability to pay for particular platforms, then we reduce the access, or not necessarily we, but access is reduced. Then I think that becomes problematic.
Yeah, we're like back at this intersection where you can see how the technology has such great potential to democratize access and improve equity, and yet applied incorrectly or not, you know, applied through paywall, you're gonna you could shatter that opportunity really easily. So it's a little bit sort of time will tell. I'm hoping there's enough work in this space that one organization is not going to monopolize this technology, and therefore that tends to create a little bit more equitable access. But I'm also optimistic, so I'm glad we're all feeling mostly in that realm. Hopefully our audience is feeling that way as well. So any other final, sorry, yes, go ahead.
We're 5-minute time check real quick, but there is a question in the chat. I am sure there's probably research out there on this, but are we thinking that students prefer interacting with a chatbot, but if they knew it was a chatbot, then they wouldn't?
I think, so I do think I don't think there's a lot of existing research. If I'm wrong, please somebody post it. I do think there's a lot of people thinking about this as a question right now. My sense is that students in many ways would prefer to interact with a chatbot, even if they knew it was a chatbot, but you still need to tell them it's a chatbot, right? That for a lot of reasons that we talked about today, sometimes it's less embarrassing to disclose something that you know is just technology, or you're not as ashamed maybe to bring something up, or it's just faster at getting you an answer. And so there's a lot of advantages there, but still it's important that you know that's not a human on the other side, because the way that you want to have that relationship seems like it needs to have that knowledge to allow you to build that relationship authentically. I don't know, Kim or Miko.
No, I agree. I mean, we certainly saw that at Georgia State, where Pounce was obviously a chatbot.
Yeah.
And Pounce identified as a chatbot, but students often preferred speaking with Pounce. But you weren't going to pretend like, yes, Pounce is actually the mascot, and the mascot is answering your questions. You know, that was not the intent. But you think of all of the chatbots you interact with when you're shopping, or when you're trying to evaluate a product or whatever else. You know, you go, any chat is essentially a chat bot. Right. And usually it will, you know, identify it as a chat bot, although sometimes it does give itself a human name, like, hey, I'm Alex, your chatbot. And sometimes they're really good and sometimes they're not. But I do, personally, I don't mind talking to it. I'm happy to talk to it because it's available 24/7. But I like to know whether it's a real human who's answering that question or not. Because sometimes, perhaps this is wrong of me to say, but sometimes I will interact differently with a chatbot than I will with a real human. I may allow myself to become more impatient with what is inanimate than with somebody who's a human.
Right. Right. And you want to know if you need to qualify the answer that you're getting. And there's all kinds of reasons you'd want to know the source of where things are coming from. So I totally agree with that. Miko, any final thoughts on that one?
I think it depends on the experience that you give to the learner. If your chatbot is poorly trained and is helpless and you don't get the answers that you want and you're not constantly training and retraining, the students are going to give up. But if they keep having positive experiences, they will come back to use it. And it can get to the point in which they will have no problem knowing that it's not human because they know that you're putting an effort to make it really useful for them. It's all about how they get an experience.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, on that note, and because we're running into the end here, I just want to thank you again, our panelists, Kim and Miko. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise and your ideas and all the wonderful technologies that you have been leveraging that other people maybe can learn from as well. Thank you to the audience for joining us today. I will say that we have another webinar coming up on June 18th with Audrey Dempsey from the College of Dublin. She's going to talk a little bit about how they're using virtual community platforms to help support their business school and help students stay connected there. And if you want to, we'll be at a bunch of conferences coming up. So if any of you are going to be hitting the conference circuit this summer and fall, definitely let us know. Come find us. Stay connected with me if you want. You can reach me mostly on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way.